Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to introduce the concept of multiplying fractions. And so we're going to start out on an easier level just so we can understand the concept of how to multiply fractions. So look, I put this problem on the screen. It's 6 times 1 6. So we're going to start with that. The normal concept for multiplying fractions is just the same as multiplying whole numbers. So if we have 6 times 1 6, we're going to start out multiplying a whole number by a fraction because that's easier to visualize. So in this case, it's like adding 6 1 6 together. So if you could imagine like a pizza pie, it would be like having 6 pieces of this pie, and each of these is 1 6, and we have 6 of them. So visually, this looks like it should add up to 1, hopefully. So yeah, that's essentially what multiplying fractions is. But it's a lot more practical to have like a method to solve these problems instead of just drawing pictures of fractions. So the trick to multiplying fractions is you can kind of reduce what you're multiplying by. For an integer, you can reduce the integer and you can reduce it by the denominator of the fraction. So for this problem, for example, I could say, okay, so I have 6 and I have 1 6. So let's cross out the 6 and cross out the 6. And then it's kind of like dividing both the integer and the denominator by 6 because that's their common factor. So if I divide them both by 6, I have 1 here and I have 1 here. And it's basically like multiplying 1 times 1, which is just 1. If that's too confusing, let's try it with a different example. Let's try 6 times 5 sixths. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it again because I have 6 in the denominator and I have a 6 integer over here. So I can cross out the 6, boom, boom. I'm dividing both of these by 6. And so I have 1, 1. And now, with this new problem of 1 times 5 divided by 1, which is just 5, my answer is 5. Literally, if you do this problem, the answer of 6 times 5 6 is equal to 5. Now let's try it again with another problem. 6 times 1 half. Again, we're going to do the same strategy of simplifying by dividing the integer and the denominator by the same number. But this case doesn't have both 6. So we're going to find the greatest common factor between these two numbers, which is 2. And we're going to divide both of these numbers by 2. So cross both of these out. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we have 3 times 1 over 1, which is just 1. So 3 times 1 is equal to 3. 6 times 1 half is equal to 3. Now let's try another problem. Let's try 6 times 3 fourths. So we're going to simplify, again, the integer and the denominator by the least common fraction. The least common factor. The greatest common factor. So we're going to cross out the 6 and the 4. It seems like their greatest common factor is 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we simplified it as much as possible. So our fraction now is 3 times 3. So when we multiply fractions, we always multiply an integer by the numerator. We multiply like sideways. So we will always multiply denominators with each other and then numerators with each other. So because a whole number is basically just like saying like this number over 1. So it's basically like multiplying 3 times 3 and then 1 times 2. But we don't have to always do that. So we just multiply the integer directly with the numerator and then bring the denominator over if it's like 6 times 3 over 3 fourths. So 3 times 3 is 9, and then 1 times 2 is 2. So our answer is 9 halves. So we learned this method just now, right? So you're wondering, do we have to do it? Like, what if we just like did, for example, 6 and 5 6 without any of the simplifying beforehand? So what happens when we just do that and use like the multiplying method where we just, like I said, this is just like 6 over 1. So we're just going to multiply the numerators and then multiply the denominators. We can do that too. So 6 times 5 is 30. And then 1 times 6 is 6. So now we have this improper fraction. And so when you go to simplify it, so you just do 30 divided by 6. And you get the answer to be 5 again, just like we got from before. So it gives us the same answer, but simplifying basically will make it a lot easier for us when the numbers get bigger, and we won't have to do like really difficult calculations, and like numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Sometimes they can get really complicated. So simplifying lets us get rid of the bigger numbers using like an easier method before we actually have to do the hard calculations. So it's good to get in the practice of it now. So that's how to simplify like integers multiplied by fractions. So what if we have like the example of a fraction such as let's say 3/4 times 0. Again, the rule that we learned from before is that any fraction or any number multiplied by 0 is equal to 0, because it's like saying like adding 0 of a number, which is impossible because there's nothing there. So the answer is always 0. Same thing occurs with fractions times 0. It's just going to be 0 again, because it's like saying, okay, let's add 0/3/4. So we don't draw anything. So there's nothing there. And so any fraction times 0 is still equal to 0 as well. It follows the same rules as whole numbers. That's our introduction into multiplying fractions. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.